I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch, the show that keeps a watch on President Trump and reports to you what he's been doing in the last week, especially with respect to the liberty and rights of the American people. Well, President Trump just returned from a trip to the Middle East where he visited several Arab countries. For some odd reason, he skipped Israel. Seems to me odd, given that the U.S. government is Israel's biggest supporter, especially with foreign aid, money, equipment, armaments, in order to assist it in waging its very, very brutal war in Gaza against the Palestinians. And then, of course, over here, the Trump administration, the immigration goons have been going after immigrants here who have been protesting the Israeli government's actions in Gaza. And as a result of those protests, the Trump administration and the immigration officials have said that that makes these students anti-Semitic. In other words, if you criticize the Israeli government, you supposedly hate Jews. It doesn't make much sense, but it's a strategical thing. It's designed to, of course, limit or suppress criticism of the Israeli state. So it's kind of odd that Trump would skip Israel to go all the way over there to visit these Arab countries. But one possible reason is that he struck some deals over there, including some arms deals, which I think there's like $140 billion worth of arms sales, which is really weird to me because, we hear a lot about private arms dealers where the government's going after sellers of private arms. And we hear, of course, from the left about all the armaments in the United States, the people own guns and so forth, widespread gun ownership. And it's really strange that here the President of the United States is going abroad as a salesman, an armament salesman. I mean, it's just really strange. And so he comes back and crows about, oh, look what I did. I sold all these armaments. And, of course, it's these armaments companies that are ones that are actually going to be doing the selling. But he's like a sales rep or something like that. It's very strange. And, there's something about authoritarian regimes that Trump just seems to like. Or at least he has proclivity toward leaning toward them in favor of them. I mean, these Arab regimes are all authoritarian regimes. They're brutal regimes. There's no such things like freedom of speech in these regimes. And Trump just had a wonderful time there. Seemed to have had a wonderful time. But it's not the only time where he's displayed this proclivity toward authoritarian regimes. There's also El Salvador, where this guy Bukele is a brutal dictator there. Yeah, he's elected, but I mean, you can have elected dictators. There's no question about that. The question of whether a ruler is a dictator goes to the extent of his powers, not whether he's elected or not. In fact, in Latin America, there's a common saying that we have the freedom to elect our dictator every 4 years or every 6 years or so, because that's how often their elections come up. And Trump has shown a proclivity again toward the dictator there, Yapib Bukele, and just he seems to like the regime. In fact, he's using the regime, of course, to send immigrants down there so that this guy Bukele can incarcerate them in his terrorism confinement center. But it's also not the only time that Trump has shown a proclivity toward authoritarian regimes. Remember that in his first term in office, he actually fell in love with the dictator in North Korea. Now, this guy comes from the left, communist, socialist. Bukele, I'm not sure where he stands. I would assume he's more conservative. But it seems to me that with Trump, it's not real determinative whether a ruler is, or an authoritarian ruler is a leftist or somebody over on the right. It just seems to me that he seems to like this notion that a ruler has omnipotent power. He doesn't have to worry about the courts. doesn't have to worry about lawyers, that he doesn't have to worry about the legislature, that he can do what he believes is proper for the good of the country, and which of course is the power that these authoritarian rulers have. And it's ironic that here one of these regimes is Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is a brutal regime. Remember, this is the regime that had that guy Jamal Khashoggi executed or murdered there in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. I mean, it was just horrendous. This guy, of course, was a Saudi citizen, but very prominent guy, columnist for the Washington Post, and all he does is walk into this embassy to get some papers to enable him to get married from the Saudi regime, because he's a Saudi citizen, but he was a dissident. I mean, they hated this guy because he was very critical of the regime. Well, I mean, Khashoggi, in a very dumb act, goes into this embassy. Well, that's the property of the foreign government in Turkey, and in every embassy. That's like, a foreign outpost. And so they took him into custody, and from every indication, they killed him and then dismembered his body. The CIA believed that it was the higher ups there that executed him, and it stands to reason, because in an authoritarian regime there, underlings are not going to commit a vicious murder without the permission or authority of somebody in the higher ups there. And so there's just something unseemly about an American president cavorting with these people in these countries, and it's totally unnecessary. There's absolutely no reason why a president of the United States has to go abroad and cavort with any ruler for that matter, but much less authoritarian rulers. What's the point? Trump might say, well, I'm over here cutting deals. I'm cutting deals. In a genuine free market society, that is a society based on free market principles, private property principles, the government has no role in that. That this is all for the private sector. Private businessmen know how to sell their products. They know how to travel overseas. They know how to make contacts. And so if they want to sell something, that's their business. What business is the U.S. government, and especially the President of the United States, acting as a salesman? It's just really, really bizarre. So in any event, that's what took place there. Now, there's also this thing with Syria, which is kind of bizarre too, that this new president of Syria, he has now been converted, from what I can tell, into a new official enemy. Official friend of the United States. That before becoming this new ruler of Syria, he was designated to be a terrorist, okay? Because the U.S. government has the authority to label people terrorists. Okay? He's a terrorist. And so this guy was an official terrorist. And so all of a sudden, this guy ends up on top in Syria after they finally fulfill the regime change operation that they'd been striving for there in Syria. And so now apparently this guy is now an official friend, and Trump praised this guy and says he's a very impressive guy. And of course, I don't know what they're going to do now with this designation of terrorist, because you've got the President of the United States saying, hey, this looks like a good guy, and you've got the other part of the government saying, well, this is an official terrorist. Not really sure where this one's going to fall out, but it really goes to show you the inanity of U.S. foreign policy anyway. So on the tariff front, there's been a couple of interesting developments. Walmart announced that it was going to be raising prices because of the tariffs, that the tariffs were finally going to be having an impact. And Walmart just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that it would be having to raise its prices because of these tariffs. So Trump went ballistic and went after Walmart on social media, saying, blasting them for doing this, raising prices in response to the tariffs. Well, but everybody knew that this was going to happen. The tariffs are a tax. they're attacks, and they're attacks on the American people. Now, Trump kept implying that, oh no, the foreign regimes are paying this for. We're really teaching those foreigners a lesson because we're going to be taking their money and putting it into the coffers of the U.S. government, which of course desperately needs the money. I mean, they got $37 trillion in federal debt, and they're going to get more desperate as time goes on. They're looking for money every way they can, and but the truth is that the tariff is a tax on the American people. It's a sales tax. You buy something from China, you pay a sales tax there, not just a regular sales tax, but also a tariff sales tax, a sales tax on goods that you buy from foreign countries. And so Walmart, like a lot of other countries, buys goods from China and from other countries and brings them in and sells things at very low prices, which is very satisfactory to the American people. You know, Americans like paying low prices for high quality goods. And so Walmart just simply says, hey, we're going to let you all know that we're going to raise our prices. Well, Trump goes ballistic and says, well, why don't you just eat it up? You've made billions of dollars and you should absorb this tax yourself. You should pay it yourself and not pass it on to your customers, which is an interesting, revealing statement because it shows you that Trump is now aware that it's Americans that are paying this tax. And when he says you should absorb this tax, what he's saying is you should take your money and send it to the U.S. government instead of requiring your customers to do this. Well, life doesn't work out that way, and when you get a tax, normally the business is going to pass that tax on to the people who are buying the product. But I mean, all Walmart's doing is just stating the obvious. You know, what is Trump so upset about? Well, it seems to me he might be upset that they made the announcement, that they should have just kept quiet about it. In fact, the reason I say that is if we look over at Amazon, that's pretty much what happened with Amazon. Amazon announced that they were going to, on their shopping cart, break down how much each item that they were going to increase was going to result in an increase in price. So when you buy something from Amazon, you can see the sales tax there. They give you that, or an estimated sales tax. It was just going to be estimated or tariff tax there. And so you have your regular sales tax, but then you have your sales tax on buying something from a foreign country. And Trump went crazy with this. I mean, just blasted Amazon that just went after him. And you see, every business knows the power of a president, and you just never know what a president's going to do. There's so many regulations, there's tax provisions, there's the IRS, and so when a president expresses anger or dismay over what a private sector company is going to do, very rarely do those private sector companies stand up and say, you know, forget it. We're not going to comply with your anger and your order and whatever. And that's what Amazon should have done. They should have just said, what we do is none of your business. And said, we're going to be posting this tariff so that our customers will know it. And that we're not just raising prices arbitrarily. That it's because of your tariffs that this is happening. But they didn't do that. They backed down just like a lot of other Americans back down. Americans are afraid. There is no question that we live in a country where there is a lot of fear. I mean, there's fear of the official enemies that the government has, the terrorists. You know, I mentioned that earlier. They're the official enemy, an official enemy, the terrorists. The illegal immigrants, another one. Russia, China, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. The illegal immigrants, the drug dealers, the drug lords, the drug cartels. And Americans are just scared to death of all these things. But when the President of the United States says to big companies, you know, I don't want you doing this, they get scared because the President's got power. And so Amazon backed down, and not real clear, you know, what's going to happen with with Walmart. I think they're going to go ahead and pass the tax on to their customers, but we'll wait and see. My only point is that, Trump imposes this enormous tariffs, raises taxes on the American people, and then gets upset because of the results, and that is that Americans are having to pay this tax, and maybe even worse, that Americans are finding out that it's not the foreigners who are paying this, it's they, the American people, who are paying it. All right, well, in immigration, we see this tax phenomenon also. I mean, did you ever see, I think you see the day where Republicans just love taxes. I mean, it's just a question of what kind of taxes. Oh, yeah, they want to lower income taxes, especially for those in the higher income brackets. But when you look at a tariff, that's a tax, and it's a regressive tax. It falls on the poor. That doesn't seem to bother Republicans. They have become the party of taxation. And so you see this now in this new bill that's being proposed out of Congress, and you can guess where the title of the bill came from. Is called One Great Big Beautiful Law or something like that. Or One Great Big Beautiful Bill or something. That's the title of it. And what they're proposing hasn't passed yet. What they're proposing, and this is really despicable as far as I'm concerned, a 5% tax on any monies that foreigners send back home, like to their families. So here you have the poorest people that you'd ever find. I mean, when you look at the inscription on the Statue of Liberty, and I know the pro-immigration people hate that inscription. I mean, as far as they're concerned, they ought to erase it. Maybe we ought to erase it because it really is just of historical interest. But it talks about, bring us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, your teeming shores, the refuge of your teeming shores. And in other words, your poorest people, what others would consider the dregs of society. That's who we want. That's what that inscription says. Well, you can understand how that really upsets immigration control advocates today, and why they would love to see that inscription just totally erased, or put a drape over it or something. But these are the poorest people. I mean, they come over here, they risk their lives. I love them. I mean, I love these people. They risk their lives. They leave their families, everything, just to work, improve their lives through labor, and send them back. And I know, yes, the Trump administration says, oh, they're all rapists and murderers, and that's all who we're deporting. It's pure nonsense. The reason they create that image among fear-filled Americans that the rapists and the murderers and the robbers are coming to get you is so that Americans will feel good about what's going on with these poor people and how the government's treating these poor people. So that way Americans can go to church every Sunday and feel like they're praying and everything, and then on Monday morning they can feel good about what's happening. And of course, most of the people are not murderers and rapists and robbers and so forth. In fact, they conjure up this image that Mexico is just filled with these violent people who are all like conglomerating at the border like zombies, okay? Like The Walking Dead or the Last of Us, this other program on HBO where the zombies are trying to get in. Of course, never mind that there's more than 1 million Americans living in Mexico. They've chosen Mexico over the United States, and they're living in this land where all these zombies are. But we don't ever hear anything like, oh, the robbers and the murderers and the rapists and so forth are getting them. They're all at the border trying to get into the United States. But the fact is most of these immigrants that are coming here are just people trying to improve their lives or save their lives. When these people fled Venezuela, the socialism there it's been a catastrophe, along with U.S. sanctions, economic sanctions. And that's the real dark irony, is that the sanctions and the socialism put these people in a vice. And millions of people fleeing the country. And I guarantee you they're not all gang members. We're talking about like 7 or 8, 10 million people. It's been a phenomenal thing. And the movements of people out of a country, an exodus out of there. And so many of them made their way to the United States as trying to save their lives, the lives of their children. It's what any American would do, given a similar situation. If you're faced with staying in a country and dying and seeing your children die, or seeing your children recruited by a drug cartel, which might be tempting because you're starving and you think, well, my daughter, at least will live by working for this drug cartel. You might be tempted to do it, but the other alternative is, I'm going to get out of there, even if I have to risk my life and cross the Rio Grande and get into the United States. And it's just amazing to me how people can treat them so badly, and at the same time support the sanctions. You see, if you lifted the sanctions, things would improve somewhat, where you wouldn't have this large exodus. But no, the attitude is, no, we want these Venezuelans deported back to Venezuela. And if Venezuela doesn't take them, then we want them in a penitentiary in El Salvador, because now El Salvador is part of the U.S. empire, and they'll do as we say. And so you got people, these immigrants who just came in trying to save themselves, that are now sitting in a penitentiary in El Salvador, that it's independent. Trump says he has no control over it, that once he deposits them there in El Salvador, that's it. So this new law is going to tax the money they send their families back, because that's a lot of them do. They come here, they make some money, and they send it back. And I was reading somewhere where the amount totals on average about like 15% of their income. I mean, you want family values? These are family values. Where a man comes up here, why would he do it? Okay, let's say he makes $30 in 2 weeks down there in Mexico. He can make $30 in half a day here. So, it's a no-brainer. They risk their lives to come over here. They work hard, and they send a large part of their money back to their wife and their children, if they haven't brought them with them, or their mother down there. I mean, this is the type of thing that any Christian would say, wow, that's really an impressive thing. This is a man that's taking care of his family. This is what God wants us to do, right? And so they're gonna be punished. 5% tax. That's what this great big beautiful bill is that the Republicans are posing there on remittances sent down there. I'm telling you, they're desperate for money. It's money, 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 money. And so a 5% tax on income that's already been taxed, because we have an income tax in this country ever since 1913. We've had an income tax. And immigrants pay taxes too. They may have a fake Social Security number or fake, identification or citizenship status or immigration status or whatever, but they're still withholding when they're working for an employer, and a lot of times, they never get the Social Security. It's like a free gift to the Social Security recipients. I don't know why seniors are complaining, because they're taxing immigrants to fund the Social Security system, and they're never going to collect on that Social Security and be able to take from the young people when they get old, which is what seniors, of course, are doing today. And so now they're going to tax it again. The same income they've already taxed, we're going to tax 5%. This is despicable. I mean, this is just really lowbrow. How do you get lower than that? Going after the poorest of the poor by not only trying to deport them to where they're facing starvation or recruiting into a drug gang, which is a direct result of the U.S. drug war. That's the other thing, is that, these gangs in Venezuela and stuff, they're because of the U.S. drug war. At least the drug gangs are. And when you say, well, let's end the drug war, oh, no, there's too many people dependent on the drug war. DEA, federal judges, CIA, federal prosecutors, and on and on. There's a lot of people dependent on the bureaucracy. Well, there's been, I think I told you all about this bakery down in South Texas. It's near Brownsville. It's in a little town called Los Fresnos. It's right near the border. And they're much like my hometown of Laredo. They're predominantly Mexican-American. And so this couple came here. I think they came here illegally. I'm not sure, but they're here legally now. But they're still Mexican immigrants. They established this bakery many years ago, and everybody loves the bakery in this little town. But they hired illegal immigrants. Now you got to understand that when in South Texas, on the borderlands, the culture is totally different from what it is in the United States. I was born and raised there. I spent almost 30 years of my life. It's just totally different. I mean, okay, in predominantly Mexican-American areas, Laredo, my hometown, had like 98% Mexican Americans. I mean, everybody looks alike. I mean, you can't distinguish between an illegal immigrant and a Laredoan, a citizen. It's impossible. I mean, now the dress might be bad. You might be able to do it there, but in terms of appearance, the language, everybody in Laredo spoke Spanish, or most people, and so in Los Fresnos, the little town, the people established this bakery that everybody loves. Okay, so they're doing a really service to the community. They're selling things that people want. That's what the free enterprise system is all about. But they hire some people that are just desperate from across the river. That are illegal, and they had mattresses in there where they were sleeping, and they're helping them sustain their lives. They're making money out of this bakery. They're paying them. It was the same on our farm when I was growing up. The illegals that we hired, hardest working people I've ever seen, they slept there. We had a place there where they lived with us there on the farm. I mean, this is not an unusual thing along the border. It's a customary thing, and normally the Border Patrol would just look the other way. On the locals, they would enforce the highways and the checkpoints and stuff. But the locals, they pretty much left alone. But they're obviously not doing this now. So they charged this couple with a felony for harboring illegal immigrants. Well, when they passed the harboring law, you see, that was going to be the big reform. Hiring, harboring, and transporting. If they couldn't get jobs and they couldn't have a place to sleep and whatever, transporting, this was going to solve the immigration crisis forever. It was sort of like the Berlin Wall that they built down there. That was going to be the cure-all. Or when the Mexican troops are going to the Mexican president's going to send 10,000 troops to the border, Mexican troops, that's going to solve the problem. I've heard this all my life, that this is the key to solving the immigration crisis. And so this harboring law, I don't think it was ever designed to do this, but these are just poor people working in a bakery. And boy, they're going after them. Now, the people up here in Washington, D.C. is kind of ironic, because you see, I've always said, if you think that police state, that militarized police state, because now they got troops down there, you got the DEA, FBI, Homeland Security, ICE, Immigration, Customs. I mean, it's a veritable police state down there in Laredo. I mean, you go to Dunkin' Donuts, and I guarantee you, half the customers there are the cops, federal cops. Okay. Well, now they're doing it in Washington D.C. They're raiding businesses there, restaurants. They're going in there saying, we need to see your official papers on all your employees. And I mean, this is like Soviet Union type stuff. And from what I can tell, though, they're not indicting the restaurant owners in Washington where they find illegal immigrants, but because that this is Washington. I mean, people have influence. These are prominent people that own these restaurants and stuff. In Laredo, these two bakery owners, they don't have that kind of influence. And it's what I've said when I got back to practice law in Laredo. I was going to file a lawsuit. I actually filed it, where I was arguing the arbitrariness of the enforcement of the law, because a law is supposed to be enforced across the board. For good or bad, it should be enforced against everybody equally, equal treatment under law. Well, they don't do that. They charge this bakery couple with a felony, but over here in Washington, they're not going to charge anybody with a felony. So it's just arbitrary and capricious. That, oh yeah, he's got influence, we won't charge him, but over here, he doesn't have influence, these are poor people, we'll go after them. So, but the federal judge called me in and said, look, I was a brand new lawyer. He says, why don't you forego the lawsuit, and instead, why don't I appoint you to represent illegal immigrants, which I wanted anyway. You know, I was asking him to appoint me to represent illegal immigrants for free. And he says, and you can bring all your constitutional arguments there. And so I said, good, okay. So, because I figured that's just as good at raising all the issues, maybe even better, because it's a criminal case. Courts seem to pay more attention to criminal cases. So I would bring up my arguments on this arbitrary enforcement of these laws whenever he'd appoint me to represent an illegal immigrant for, illegal entry or whatever. And the prosecutor kept offering me sweet plea bargains, or my clients sweet plea bargains that I forget what the terms were, but they were so attractive that my client would say, well, what do you think? And I'd say, well, it's up to you. I'd like to keep fighting, but I don't want to fight at your expense. And this is a really sweet bargain. I said, I think you really ought to take it. And so, it was like deportation with no conviction and nothing on the record or something like that. It's a really sweet deal. Because the way the illegal immigrant thing works is that if you come in the first time, I think it's a misdemeanor. But if you come in a second time, it's a felony. And so in any event, they were offering sweet plea bargains. So I couldn't raise the thing. I never was able to raise the issues at the trial level, and much less on appeal, because the case would be resolved with a plea bargain. But there's no question that this thing is just horrendous in terms of arbitrariness, capriciousness, unequal treatment under law, and what's happening with this couple is just a tragedy. These are just regular people. I mean, this is what I've said before. When you see a law where regular people are being indicted and prosecuted and convicted, you know that something's wrong with that system. And of course, there is something wrong with this system. It's a bad, bad, malignant system. That's this week's Trump Watch. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for your great support of FFF, the Future of Freedom Foundation, and I look forward to seeing you next week.